Hi, I'm Diane. Welcome back to the channel if you've been here before, and if you've not, welcome. This is How to Train Your Caterpillar, a spiritual life coaching channel. Thank you very much for clicking on the video, I really appreciate it. And if, once you've watched it, or maybe during, or whatever, if you feel like liking and subscribing for me, if you feel like it's useful and stuff, I'd really appreciate that. So this video is going to be about, it's just a kind of introduction, obviously, to the shadow self, like what is the shadow self and what is shadow work. Because obviously this is a vast topic, okay, so this is just a little intro for, maybe those of you that are not familiar with these terms, because it's something that's thrown around a lot, shadow work, that term, and I didn't realize what it was for a really long time until I'd kind of already done quite a bit of it, and I feel like if I just had something to label it with, so I knew what was going on, I would have been a lot more like amenable to it and like a lot more chilled out about it, instead of being like, oh my god, the world's ending and like I'm having some kind of nervous breakdown. No, you're just doing your shadow work. So once you can kind of label it, you're like, okay, I can cope with this. So that's the intention behind this video. So the shadow self, to start off with, is a term that was coined by a psychiatrist called Carl Jung, who, obviously there's tons about him, if you want to go and look him up, obviously, that would be a great thing to do, don't feel like you have to, but the shadow self is the subconscious aspects of yourself that you are not aware of, that are secretly controlling your life. They're controlling your actions, they're controlling the way you think about yourself, your own self-worth, how you interact with other people, the types of jobs that you allow yourself to go for, everything, okay? So the ways that the shadow self can manifest in your personality on a day-to-day basis, and you may be aware of some of these personality quirks, or you may not. Some people are more aware of these things than others, and obviously these are just examples. It's vast, it can be so many things, but feeling like you're shy is one. Being kind of needy in relationships or friendships, constantly finding yourself in codependent relationships where you are the person giving and the other person is taking. Finding yourself in relationships like friendships or love relationships with someone who's very critical. Maybe you're a perfectionist, maybe you're a workaholic, maybe you struggle with different kinds of addictions, right? It's like you just quit one thing and then you move on to something else. These are all manifestations in the personality of aspects of the shadow self that have not been dealt with, okay? So shadow work is when you start to become aware of these personality traits, like the neediness, the codependency, blah blah blah, and you start to ask yourself why. Like, where did it come from? Like, why do I have this? Because you're kind of looking around at other people and you're going, well, this person doesn't struggle with self-worth, this person isn't shy, this person isn't like a workaholic. Where am I getting these weird personality quirks from? It's coming from the shadow self. Because once you start to ask why, you will then start to trace back these personality quirks to past experiences and interactions with people from your past that you have associated certain emotions with. Most of the time, the shadow self is kind of formed, it really comes from childhood experiences or teenage experiences. This is where we tend to form these connections. For example, like, I'm just going to take a really easy one because I don't want to trigger people, but say you identify as shy, right? You weren't born shy. Babies are not born shy. Some children are more introverted, with the really little children. Obviously that's not the same thing as shy. Being introverted is not the same thing as shy. Being shy is when you have learned over time that if you put yourself out there, or you make yourself be seen, or you say the things that you want to say, there's going to be some kind of consequence. Like you're going to get, you know, shouted down, or you're going to get insulted, or, you know, there's going to be a fight about it or something like this, right? So, you know, being shy is not something that you were born with. It may be something that you developed within your family. It may be something that happened, you know, maybe you got bullied in school, something like this. It doesn't always have to be to do with your parents. It can, you know, or your caregivers. It can be to do with something that happened in your teenage years, right? What else? I'm just going to give one more example, like abandonment issues, for example. Like if you're quite needy as an adult, like within, you know, even friendships and love relationships, like you're quite needy, you find yourself needing a lot of validation, like maybe you're worried like people are going to leave you. This can come from abandonment issues in childhood, right? And it doesn't even have to be that you had an absent caregiver. It can be that you had an adult who was emotionally kind of unavailable, or an emotionally unstable adult, or something like this. It can come from that, you know. And I think I read somewhere about addictions, don't quote me on this, but I think I read somewhere about addictions that it comes from like a lack of emotional stability in childhood. So maybe, I don't know, look that one up if that's something that you struggle with. But there's a connection. It's usually something fairly early on. So shadow work is when you start to become aware of the personality traits like neediness, codependency, and then you start to trace it back to the event or person that it's associated with. Because once you become aware of it, you can cut the tie, right? Because as an adult, you're going, oh, well, I don't need to worry about that anymore. I mean, I don't have to try and you know, I have coped with the fact that someone, maybe a caregiver, left when I was a child, right? Or I've coped with the fact that I was bullied in high school, because now I know, you know, amongst other adults, I'm very unlikely to be beaten up for what I'm going to say, or I'm very unlikely to be kind of mercilessly bullied for the things that I'm going to say, right? Or, you know, maybe you had an emotionally unavailable parent as a child and it led you to be needy, but as an adult you could be like, well, I don't need that emotional fulfillment from that person anymore. I'm an adult, I can give that to myself, right? This is when you start to break the cycles, because you tend to look for the things that you experienced in childhood. You tend to go out and repeat that as an adult, even though it's not conscious, you don't want to do it. It doesn't make you feel good or happy, but you're gonna do it because it's familiar. So if you were dealing with emotionally distant parent as a child, you're gonna go out subconsciously as an adult and look for emotionally distant partners and friends, right? Because that's what you're familiar with. If you had an environment as a child, or your teenage years, whatever, where there was like one particularly controlling person, again, you're going to go out and seek that as an adult, right? So once you become aware of the connection, you can cut it, right? And you're not going to keep finding yourself subconsciously seeking out these toxic situations. Again, somewhere in childhood you've learned that you're maybe not as worthy as other people, right? Maybe you learned it in your teenage years when you were being bullied, but as an adult you can kind of take a step back. You can look at that and be like, no, that's not right. I am worthy. I'm just as worthy as everyone else. That person in high school bullied me because like they were being, I don't know, they were having a bad time at home, they didn't like themselves, they were going through puberty, and teenagers just suck. Do you know what I mean? You can kind of rationalize it as an adult, and you can cut the, you know, these connections that are holding you back, right? This is what shadow work is. When you get on the spiritual path, what happens is that spirit will trigger these shadow aspects of yourself so that they can be brought into the light and healed and become a whole part of you, because they're called your shadow aspects and the shadow self because it's like the part of you that's like the darkness, right? The part of you that's, you know, not so pleasant to look at, right? But there's nothing to be ashamed of with these things. You know, it's just that it's the thing that's holding you back, so it needs to be healed, right? Because shame is such a low vibration emotion. Anger is such a low vibration emotion. Like if you're finding that maybe anger is your kind of go-to emotion, right? There's a reason for that, you know, and anger tends to be associated with like sadness that has never been processed in some way. So if you're finding yourself being angry all the time, like in your day-to-day kind of life, like that's kind of your go-to emotion, I mean, it's better than shame, but still, you're not gonna ascend if your baseline is kind of anger. So you kind of need to look at why you're angry all the time, you know, and then you can be like, oh, well, that's just sadness. I can let go of that. That's like repressed sadness. I can release that now. And then you will find in your day-to-day life that you're less angry, right? So you can like ascend. It's like each time you do a little bit of shadow work, you kind of release baggage, right? And you can ascend that little bit higher. So Spirit will trigger it in different ways on the spiritual journey. Sometimes it will be a huge trigger. Usually I find talking to a lot of people at the start of the spiritual journey, it's usually some kind of big trigger. You know, it's usually like some kind of interaction with a person that will do it, that will kind of instigate the first triggering and kind of really make you start looking at yourself. And then it just kind of keeps going. Like, for example, Spirit will keep putting the same type of person on your path over and over and over again until you get to the point where you can identify the person and be like, what is this? This is not happening because I know what you're about. No. And you can just like walk away from it, or you can just, you know, almost intervene in your own life, because you're not just kind of passively going through the motions anymore. You've taken a step back and you're going, no, that's not happening. I'm not going back to that. No. Because the end goal of all of this shadow work obviously is to become free of all these suppressed emotions that are holding you back and stopping you from ascending, free from all the, you know, the shame and the anger and like this I don't know, codependency and neediness and all this kind of thing that's going to stop you from being happy. It can also be triggered, so that's what I was going to say, it tends to be triggered by like one major thing right at the start of your journey, but it will be triggered, it's not something that happens overnight, you know, it's a process of like many years. Shadow work takes many years for you to start integrating all these shadow aspects, okay, because they've been around for basically your whole life, if you think about it that way. So I find a lot of the time that shadow work, for me anyway, will be triggered around about a new moon or a full moon, or for women, maybe around your period is another one. It can be triggered by watching a movie, something that reminds you of some kind of event or person from your past that just kind of triggers you. Anything like this. And the thing is, it can take you out. Sometimes it will just be a little trigger, you know, and it'll just be like, oh, that reminds me of that thing, and then you'll release a little bit of emotion, right? Sometimes, other times it'll take a lot longer. Like sometimes it'll be like 2 or 3 days it'll take you out for, you know, like maybe around about the full moon or the new moon, like when emotions are heightened, Spirit will deliberately trigger you to kind of get you to release these emotions that are built up, because you're not going to do it otherwise, right? Because nobody really wants to look at this stuff. It's depressing and it's upsetting, but they kind of make you get it out in little bits. So it will be, I don't know, maybe like 3 days of just being really sad, or 2 days of being really angry and you don't know why, or 4 days of being really angry at a particular person, and then all of a sudden that'll just vanish, like a particular person from your past, and then all of a sudden you'll just be fine with it because you've released what needed to be released, right? So what I'm trying to say is, a lot of the time you may not even realize that you're doing shadow work. But I feel like once you are able to label it with like, oh, this is shadow work, it becomes a lot easier to deal with, because sometimes I feel like if you don't know what it is, you just kind of think you're being a bit of a baby. You know, you're like, oh, what is this? Like, I don't know why I'm being such a baby about this, or I don't know why I'm being so angry, and like you get all frustrated with yourself because, you know, you had all these plans and you're like, oh, I was going to do this today and I was going to do that, and you don't end up doing that stuff because you're dealing with all this emotional stuff. But it's not a waste of time. You're not being a baby. This is your shadow work. This is your shadow self being healed. This is you ascending. So the couple of days that it takes, you know, it's worthwhile. It's worthwhile doing it, of course. Once you start to recognize what it is as well, you can also control it a little bit more, so it's not quite as painful. Because I feel like now, when I'm going through the shadow work, I'm much more able to label it for what it is. So while the emotions are still there, they're still coming out, I'm more able to identify what I'm doing as surrendering old emotions and releasing them, and I know it's going to lead to me feeling better, right? Because if you think of it, I like to think of it this way, you know, if you think of yourself as a hot air balloon and you have all these like bags of sand. A bag of sand? Sorry, that's from the 40-year-old virgin. Like you have all these bags of sand that are like all your emotional crap from the past, right? That you've built up from these old associations that you don't need anymore because you're an adult now. You don't need this stuff. You can be your own cheerleader, right? You can give yourself comfort and validation that you didn't get when you were a kid, right? Or you didn't get as a teenager. So each time you get rid of one of these bags of sand, you ascend higher, right? So I think that's everything that I wanted to say. If there's anything that I've missed out or you think I've missed out, of course, leave it in the comments, you know, if you think it would be helpful for other people. But I think that was everything I wanted to say. Thank you very much for watching. I hope it was useful, I hope it was relevant and informative for you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for me if you did, and many, many blessings, love and light.